Well, for our keynote speaker this evening, we're honored to have present Dean Peter Kilpatrick, the Matthew McCluskey Dean of Engineering at Notre Dame. And I should mention that his support for interdisciplinary and inter-college work since coming to Notre Dame in January of 2008 to become Dean of the College of Engineering has been remarkable. He's participated actively in the affairs of the John J. Riley Center for Science, Technology, and Culture here at Notre Dame, in which he's a fellow. He's delivered one of the prestigious Smith Lectures, sponsored by the Center for Ethics and Culture, and he supported all phases of our efforts to develop this adult stem cell initiative. He's encouraged us also to bring into this discussion the insights of law and theology, as well as philosophy. He has a very long list of accomplishments that I'm not going to try to read. He was originally trained as a chemist, but then he served in the faculty of the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering Department at North Carolina State University before coming to Notre Dame, published many papers, and holds 14 patents with one pending, as for the last heard. Tonight's lecture is entitled Ethical Life Science Research in a Catholic University. This shows us the other side of Peter Kilpatrick's interest, which is also reflected in the fact that he teaches graduate courses in technology and ethics and has great interest in these questions. So we're pleased to present him. Peter Kilpatrick.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Can you fix it up? Probably hit this on your...
I recognize that with the opening reception and the welcoming addresses, it's already been something of a lengthy evening. So I'm going to keep my remarks to the 20 minutes that Phil asked me to take. And I'm very pleased to make a few comments about ethical life science research at a Catholic university. And the whole notion of addressing this issue seems to me to beg the question, what is a Catholic university and what is the mission and the identity of a Catholic university? Number two, what is ethical life science research? And then how do we put the two together? And I should state in advance that I'm wholly unqualified to really make these comments. I'm neither a philosopher nor a theologian. I'm really a rank amateur. And I'm not a life science researcher. I'm a chemical engineer. So I hope you'll bear with me as I attempt to piece some remarks together. So I want to start with Blessed John Paul's Constitution Ex Corde Ecclesia on what it means to be a Catholic university. So one of the points John Paul makes in this document from 1990 is that a Catholic university should really be born from the heart of the church. And it should be an incomparable center of creativity and dissemination of knowledge for the good of humanity. And I think many of us, many faculty hearing that remark, an incomparable center of creativity and dissemination of knowledge for the good of humanity, would identify that with most major research universities in this country. We would recognize that all the great research universities in the United States and Europe and around the world attempt to be centers of creativity and to disseminate knowledge largely for the good of humanity. So we have a primary role of being creative, of generating new knowledge and creating new ideas, and of teaching, educating, and acting in ways for the common good. But John Paul goes on to be a bit more challenging in Ex Corde Ecclesia. He says, it is also the honor and responsibility of a Catholic university to consecrate itself without reserve to the cause of truth. Truth is its real ally, the real ally of the Catholic university, and knowledge and reason are sure ministers to faith. A Catholic university is distinguished by its free search for the whole truth about nature, man, and God, and the present age is in urgent need of this kind of disinterested service, namely of proclaiming the meaning of truth, that fundamental value without which freedom, justice, and human dignity are extinguished. So in addition to being creative, in addition to generating new knowledge, and then disseminating it, a Catholic university has the honor and the responsibility of consecrating itself without reserve to the cause of truth. So what is the truth? What is the truth about man? What is the truth about a Catholic university? What is the truth about humankind? What is the truth about God and the truth about our relationship to God? Well, firstly, we're created in God's image and likeness. And this has consequences. The value of each human person is inestimable because we are created in his image and likeness. And in fact, I've heard it said that the value of one human person is greater than the integrated value of the entire universe that's not human. And this is hard for animal rights activists in the 21st century to hear. And yet, that's what our Catholic faith teaches us. It is that imago Dei and similitudo Dei that confers on us our dignity and our unreserved responsibility to be completely free to choose. Many animals don't choose. Humans choose. We choose life over death. We choose ethical life science research over unethical. And we choose to pursue the fundamental goods of human life. And science and technology have a very privileged role to play in creating and disseminating new knowledge for the authentic good of individuals and for the good of humanity. But there's a very great challenge, and Father Traffney really alluded to that challenge in his remarks. There was a time when we would take for granted that truth was being, and that being was truth. But that's no longer the case. Modern man really doesn't believe that anymore. Modern man believes that truth is what you can make of it. Truth is actually what we can create rather than being. And in fact, as Father Traffney alluded to, we're actually in the process of creating new realities and new truths. And the question is, what kinds of truths are those? Are they really truths? And can we really create something beyond the truth of being? These are important questions. The Holy Father, again in Ex Corde Ecclesia, says, in the world today, characterized by such rapid developments in science and technology, the tasks of a Catholic university assume an ever greater importance and urgency. Scientific and technological discoveries create an enormous economic and industrial growth, as Father Traffney alluded to, but they also inescapably require the correspondingly necessary search for meaning in order to guarantee that the new discoveries be used for the authentic good of individuals and human society as a whole. So how do we ensure that our scientific and technological discoveries and new research are indeed used for the authentic good of individuals and for the human society as a whole? How do we ensure that? One way, I would argue, is to recognize that we cannot elevate the whole of humanity. And indeed, no good is done when we trample on the rights and on the dignity of the weakest and most vulnerable in our society. When we trample on the rights of the very young or the very old, or those who cannot speak and act for themselves. When we do this, we really do no good. And we really cannot elevate society and humanity as a whole. Human persons and human beings cannot be exploited as means towards others' ends. Again, Pope John Paul in Love and Responsibility says that a true lover of other persons will never use a human person as a means to an end. So who is entitled to this protection? Who deserves to be accorded the dignity of a human being with rights. Again, we go back to the instruction Dignitatis Personae and Donum Vitae of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Very instructive point, and I want to draw some scientific analogies with it. Dignitatis Personae instructs that it is appropriate to recall the fundamental ethical criterion in order to evaluate all moral questions related to the human embryo. So I'm quoting from Donum Vitae. The fruit of human generation from the first moments of its existence, that is to say, from the moment the zygote is formed, demands the unconditional respect that is morally due to the human being in his or her bodily and spiritual totality. The human being is to be respected and treated as a person from the moment of conception, and therefore from that same moment, his or her rights as a person must be recognized, among which in the first place is the inviolable right of every innocent human being to life. Dignitatis Personae goes on to say, although the presence of the spiritual soul cannot be observed experimentally, the conclusions of science regarding the human embryo give a valuable indication for discerning by the use of reason a personal presence at the moment of the first appearance of a human life. How could a human individual and a human being not be a human person? Science and technology, as well as reason, tell us that the only definitive moment in the development of the human person is that moment at which a unique prescription for self-organizing, for genetically unique embryonic life is initiated. So it matters not how that unique embryonic life came to be, whether it was created in a test tube, whether it was formed naturally as the result of conjugal love in the womb of its mother, or whether it was twinned from the growing life of its brother or sister. Once that moment of uniqueness occurs, it cannot and must not be violated. The bishops of the U.S. Catholic Conference provide us with some additional insight as to how we might approach the mission and identity of a Catholic university. They point out in their commentary on Ex Corde Ecclesia, Article 2, a Catholic university must be committed to the practical implications of its Catholic identity. So let me sum up a little bit. A Catholic university must be committed to, in an unreserved way, to the truth about human life, to the truth about ourselves, to the truth about God, to the truth about our relationship between human persons and God. I would argue, and again, I recognize the need for dialogue, as Father Trafney alluded to, that it's apparent that there's no definitive moment at which to identify the self-organizing and unique genetic material that makes up a human person other than conception. Everything else is arbitrary. The sentient argument, the ability to survive outside the womb, all of these they're arbitrary. And in fact, with each passing year, we find that the survival outside the womb position changes, or that the sentience argument changes. And so I think it's hard to deny that, that the only definable moment is that moment at which we would confer upon, again, a human being, maybe not a human person, or maybe not even an ensouled person, but someone who has all the rights and dignities of a human person. So what kinds of life science research should and do we pursue at Notre Dame, a Catholic university? Well, I would argue that, from the points that I've made, that research that bases itself on embryo destruction would be unacceptable. And I think we've made that point before. But what kinds of research are acceptable? What kinds of research are ethical? Well, we do all kinds of ethical life science research here. And in fact, one of the things you're going to learn about over the course of this week is the full range of research that we do using adult stem cells, either mesenchymal stem cells, hemopoietic stem cells, or other stem cells that fall under that broad category. This research is robust, and indeed it's happening with great fruitfulness all over the world. I think if you've studied adult stem cell research with any attention to detail, you recognize that it's now being used to treat upwards of 70 distinct diseases and illnesses, either in experimental stages or in clinical stages, with great success. And that includes everything from 20-some forms of cancer, cardiovascular disease, juvenile diabetes. I've read the studies that were done in Latin America. Spinal cord injury, there are some very nice studies that have been done there. And many other chronic illnesses, really worldwide. And I know we're going to hear a lot about that today, or this week over the course of the workshop. Notre Dame engages in a very broad array of life science research aimed at developing in vivo and in vitro diagnostics and therapeutics, including targeted cancer therapies that rely on multivalent peptide binding. That's a particularly interesting form of research that I think is bearing great fruit and holds great promise for the treatment of cancer. And those of you that have loved ones that have been treated for cancer, you know what the alternative to targeted cancer therapy is. It's the kind of chemotherapy that we have often in clinics around the world. Notre Dame is a world leader in identifying the genetic origins of vector-borne diseases and in treating them in the first through the third worlds, including such diseases as malaria, dengue, lymphatic filariasis, and many others. Notre Dame is a world leader in the treatment of rare and neglected diseases, including Niemann Pick type C and many others that you learned about in the poster session outside. Notre Dame conducts research at the very forefront of the interaction of addressable individual cells, which when collected comprise ensembles and tissues with abiotic inorganic sensor networks. It is this interaction of systems of living cells with systems of sensors and actuators that will enable and facilitate some of the most exciting bioengineering advances of this century. And we're very blessed to have a number of committed scholars here at Notre Dame pursuing that research. So what kind of ethical life science research should be performed at a Catholic university? All research and creation of new knowledge that leads to the authentic good of individuals and of human society as a whole, and which respects the dignity of human persons and beings, is appropriate. I am particularly pleased to report that so much of the life science research that occurs here at Notre Dame is focused on the weakest, on the poorest, and on the most vulnerable members of the human family, those with the greatest suffering and those in most need of our help and support. So I'm pleased to make these few comments to you this evening. I don't know, Phil, if we have any time for questions for either myself or Monsignor or Father Traffney, but I'll be happy to answer any if you have them.